I mentioned a little bit earlier WorkSafe staff around the room, and we are lucky enough to have quite a number of WorkSafe inspectors in particular in the room today, so that during the networking and other opportunities you can have a chat to them and ask questions of them. Some of them are presenting this morning, and that's who our next speaker is. Geoff Kennedy has been a part of WorkSafe's plant and engineering team for 18 years, and I think looking around the room, he's probably the longest serving WorkSafe employee here. As a senior plant inspector, Geoff is involved in examining high hazard plants such as cranes, boilers, pressure equipment, lifts and amusement devices. And I know in that capacity he spends a bit of time at the Royal Agricultural Show each year. He's going to talk to us about machinery guarding and all of the aspects and considerations in regards to that particular topic. Over to you, Geoff.
Thanks, Andrew. Morning, everyone. Interesting what Sally said about preventable. So a lot of things are preventable, injuries and fatalities and things like that. I'm the senior inspector in the agricultural team. Comes back to plant, and my forte is machinery. So each of the members of the team have their own speciality in things, and combined we should be able to make some changes. So we look at risks involved with plant and machinery. I keep referring to plant, probably the wrong thing to do when we're talking about growing crops and things like that. So I'll stick with the word machinery. And also Sally spoke about risks and things. So a lot of times we do the mundane jobs, the same thing over and over, and we just don't pay attention, but they do have risks. So the idea is to step back, have a look at the risk, see what's involved, what's the consequences if something goes wrong, and how do we manage that. So we look at different ways of managing it. Always go back and review, see if that type of thing worked. It's very important anything you do or change like that you review. Sometimes you might have made things worse, sometimes to make them better, which is the whole intent of it. So a lot of these risks involve contact with rotating parts and things like that. Machinery that's designed to cut and thresh and things like that doesn't often stop for flesh and bones. It just keeps going. And the consequence of that is severe injuries and fatalities. Moving parts, in between moving parts, things like that. In the crane days, the front of crane that knuckles in the middle, you would never stand in between that because it can fold in and it's a pinch point, it can crush you. So a lot of moving parts and materials can fall off things. Logging can fall off a truck. You might be doing earthworks around dams and things like that. You might be using a telehandler with a bucket on it. Sometimes loose rocks and materials can fall. Some things can get thrown out of machinery. All right, they can eject if it doesn't go down the right chute, things like that. Wood chips and things like that in particular, stuff like that can still injure people. So have a good look at the risk, see what's involved and what you think you might be able to do to make it a bit better. Well, the dreaded power takeoff really is a destructive machine when it comes to flesh and bones. All right, it's designed to transmit the power from the engine down to something that works, like an auger, grain auger. It could be a pump, it could be a spray pump, it could be something like that. But the idea of that shaft that sticks out the back is to transfer all that power down to something behind the tractor. It uses all that mechanical energy. They spin at different speeds, but they won't stop. They won't stop for rags or clothing or things like that. So this is a power output coupling, you all know that, it's part of the back of the tractor. The yellow part that you can see is the guard. We've seen normally they're a pretty hard steel, pressed out and shaped, and a lot of people use them. They're a really handy thing to step on. Some of them are flexible, so, high density rubber or high density plastic. Sometimes they're a combination of both. But the idea of that is the end of the power takeoff shaft that comes from the tractor has a universal joint and things like that that can actually catch and trap you or your clothing. So it must be held securely in place. During our farm visits that Sally mentioned, we did see some of the older ones where that's been removed or the shaft itself is broken, and as it breaks it rips the guard off. The guard often doesn't get put back on. Some of the older tractors never had them. Some of the suppliers actually can sell them that you can retrofit. All right, so the most important thing is that it's there. This is the other end. This is the input coupling. So that's part of the implement, the towing. In this case, it could be a slasher or something like that. So both ends join together and rotates. Has a cover over it. So the idea of that cover, some of them slip, some of them are stationary, some of them rotate as well. That's to keep your body parts or your clothing or a fence post or a shovel from actually contacting the moving part. With the ones that slip, if you were to grab it, that should still stay stationary while the shaft moves, but I wouldn't recommend you go and do that. Just take my word for it. There's the industry duct tape in that photo. You see the industry duct tape? That little tiny bit of string down the front at the tractor end, bale twine or whatever it might be. So that's the industry duct tape. So we don't want to see any more of that. If it's got to need fixing, fix it properly. There's various ways of doing it. I visited one guy that repairs these. So the internal shaft, it's two pieces, they telescope inside each other, or one in the other. The outside one was 40mm diameter, the inside one was 19. That's too loose. That's going to flop around, sit at the wrong angle, snap, especially when someone's standing right next to it. Very dangerous activity. I know you live out on farms, you can't just take a shaft in to get welded, but your specialty might be farming. Find someone that's specialty is welding and repairing. Much safer thing to do. So like we said, it's got to go in as far as practicable. They'll have a keyway and a little spring, so you push the shaft in, make sure that pin pops back out, lets you know that it's locked in place and things like that. So just a second it takes to look at it, have a good look, and just to make sure it's connected, because they can, if they're not fitted properly, can fly off. And it's a heavy mass. Some of them are up, 5-10 kilo, depending on the horsepower that's driving it, and they'll do some damage. So we don't take shortcuts. We don't step over the power takeoff. We'll walk around the front of the tractor or the rear of the implement. Never step over a power takeoff. Don't even get into the habit of doing it while it's turned off. All right? It just builds complacency and things like that. If the guard's damaged, not a good thing to use it. And what actually caused that damage? Did the shaft do it? Was it you stepping on it, using it as a step or something? The guard's there for a reason, has clearances around it, so it's best not to damage that and change things like that. Don't use it if it's loose. I mentioned about the loose one that was assembled. Very dangerous. Things have to be in parallel. When you get misalignment, things like that, things vibrate and they come apart, and you're probably standing too close to it. Don't remove the guard sleeve. It's there for a reason. Same thing, don't use it if it's got cracks or splits, because they can be snags. As that's rotating, they could snag your loose clothing and things like that. So have a good look at that transfer of power from the tractor to the implement and make sure it's going to do its job. And don't work on it if the machine is running. Even if it's out of gear, you've taken power takeoff out, you've put it in neutral, too hard to start the engine up again, don't, turn it off. You've taken away all its threat. It can't hurt you if there's no power to it. All right, it's only when there's a possibility of power, that potential, and it might take a couple of seconds longer to restart your tractor, but it doesn't matter. Turn it off. We don't want that anything happening, rotating while you're standing there. So grain augers. There's a few dangerous things about grain augers, and the bigger the screening and the more holes and the size of the mesh, the slower it is. The slower the grain slows down, and it's really slow to transfer things. And some people are quite happy when the guard breaks because everything's a bit quicker, but it doesn't take much to get something inside that machine, a hand, a stick, a piece of clothing or something, and you won't be coming back from it. They're designed to transfer grain and things like that from one point to another. They do it very efficiently if they're serviced and maintained, and they really don't care if there's a bit of person in there. They'll still transfer it, and they'll put a bit of person up there somewhere. So make sure all the guards are there, particularly after maintenance. Sometimes you change a belt or you change something. We'll just try it without the guard first. Put the guard back on. Takes you another 10 minutes, so what? 10 minutes is a big thing, but an injury is even worse. Right? So take your time, fit everything back to the way it was. Make sure everything's guarded. So part of our inspecting on the farms, we did see a lot of stuff that's unguarded, and believe it or not, some of the places that service farming equipment, some of the terrible ones, guarding, they've got something in a header in or something for a service. They want to see the belts running and all that sort of stuff. So they just leave all the covers off and just make sure everything's aligned. But still not a good way of proceeding. All right, so put your covers back on things. With the augers, they can tip over. If they're up high, they can tip over. I'm sure you've all heard of instances like that. So we don't really want to put them on rocky or uneven ground. Right, it's a machine. Give it the best chance it can to work properly. Nice level ground. It doesn't happen a lot around the farm sheds and things. It's usually out in the paddocks and that where your terrain sort of comes into it. When you're transporting them, there's no point having them sticking up in the sky. They rip power lines out, things like that. You don't want to have to go to Sequa and say, can I have a new power line? So try and travel with them down low. That also prevents a lot of people getting electrocuted and stuff like that. So think about how you transport your augers. And of course, make sure the area is clear before you start it. So sometimes you might have other farm workers there that know about them and they'll stand back. but the same thing applies. There's no point going near it if you don't need to. All right? They're an active machine and they can do some pretty nasty things. It's not just the auger part, the drive belts and things can do the same. You have an engine on some of them, drive belts and pulleys and things. It looks good when they're out there operating because you can see if there's a fault with that drive belt, but there's no point seeing it. If it's going to fail, it's going to fail, so you might as well cover it up, keep it covered up. It prevents accidents, not just hands being put in things, it can be shovels and rakes and things like that. Okay, so if something jams up, you wouldn't try and unjam it while it's running, certainly turn it off, isolate the power and then find out why it's jamming. Belts and pulleys. So this is the header. The side of the header's been lifted up so they can look at the belts and things. If you were to change that belt and stuff and left your spanner in there, it might get flung out and hit you. And yes, it does happen. All right. Even mechanics working on cars in general workshops say the same thing. Screwdrivers and things, they fall down into the radiator, into the fan and things. That's not going to stop for a spanner. It's going to throw the spanner somewhere. So just be aware of where your tools are. It's handy to rest them up on the panel right where you're working. I'm sure we all do it. But sometimes you might forget that one tool, and that one tool can cause a lot of damage to you and your machinery. Headers. Headers have crushed a few people, and we all know that. There's no point working on a header comb or anything while your engine's running. It defeats the purpose. You've got too much potential there for hydraulic power and gears and shafts and things like that. No point doing it. Turn everything off, shut it down. When you do that, sometimes your hydraulics might sag, so we'll prop the comb up. We'll support the comb on blocks of wood or axle stands or something like that, so it can't possibly fall. All right, it's really important. Things will fall. They're not going to give you a warning. There's no bell going to go, quick, get out, I'm going to collapse. It just happens. Hoses burst, relief valves fail, and it just happens so quickly. Can't get out in time. So there's some hazards. Of course, we get entangled with the discharge augers and things like that. Believe it or not, that happens. People fall from the machine. And it's not just the falling. If you look at the header, when you climb up, the bottom of the step's quite high from the ground, so you don't have to keep moving it. It's quite a bit to fall, and a lot of people can roll their ankles. You might have a lump of clay or a bit of rock or something underneath. You step off the header and you roll your ankle. You can't strip the crop that year or something. You might have plaster on your ankle and things like that. So just be aware of getting in and out of machinery with a step that's very high. Yes, and we do have stuff that still contacts overhead power lines, believe it or not. We all know that some of you have Western Power or SEC or whatever run through your property, and they'll just come on and do what they want, things like that, and that's how they operate. But sometimes these overhead power lines can sag, especially in summer when the metal gets hot and stretches or elongates, and they'll sag. And last winter you got under it, this summer you won't. It just doesn't fit somehow, so always be aware of that. It happens in all industries, these damn power line things. They get in the way, they stop you doing things, but they kill. We can get run over, and it does happen. There's statistics that say that sort of stuff. It's really hard. Imagine driving a haul-pack truck. You can't see down one side for 300 metres because the cabin's over in one corner. Headers are the same. Your view from behind is very restricted. So, and you don't often need to go reverse, especially when you're harvesting. But if you're out there fixing your machine or servicing and things like that, just be aware of your surroundings. Don't walk behind a running header. There's no point. Go where the operator can see you. Wave to him. He'll let you know when it's okay to come over. Just little things like that. Don't just appear at the door having climbed up the steps. Say, hey. Doesn't work that way. Yes, sharp parts. They're designed to cut things and separate them. They do have sharp parts. They usually stick out the front. Same thing. Even when static, even when the knives and that aren't moving, they can be quite sharp. We saw some at a college recently. Part of their servicing procedure was exposed. So you could have walked past this thing and cut your leg. So they'd taken side guards off. So simple thing, put a barrier around it, prevent people from going near it. Right? You can't just put big signs up, don't come near me, I will cut you, but barriers are quite effective. Effective way of stopping people from going somewhere. We've had some instances with the straw chopper and other fittings that go on the back that destroy seeds and things like that. Have a good look at the original equipment manufacturer's manual. Have a look at his manual. Don't just be a boy like we do and don't read the manual. Have a read of the manual. There might be little tiny snippets in there that are very important for your safety. Have a good look. The manufacturer's designed it. It's spend a lot of money. Usually they're pretty good. It's only when they're modified or altered that things become a problem like that. Taking them off a low loader, something like that, they can fall. They're quite wide. I'm sure you've seen stuff on the internet where the tyres are sitting on the edge of the tray, hanging out and things like that. Doesn't take much, a puncture or something like that, and all of a sudden your load has shifted. Very hard to steer a header up onto the back of a low loader and stuff. The experts can do it, but the general person that's out there with one that needs to go off to get serviced or repaired or something doesn't always have that skill. Just be aware of the risk. So they're looking back at that risk. What's the risk? It could fall off and hit me. So don't stand back. I mean, that's obviously a good choice. You've still got to get on the machine, but look at how to get it on safer. A lot of the low loaders extend out wider. If the truckie doesn't want to stretch it out, well, then convince him that's really what he needs to do. He might have narrow roads to drive down. The load's not going to change the size, but the carrier can. And of course, some of these things do have automatic sensors. So they'll tell you when bins are full or half empty and things like that. Some of them use a light curtain and things. If you interrupt that light, that you might have activated something, right? We call them interlocks, all these devices that don't work until they're supposed to, or they'll make other things work. So it's quite easy to interfere with an interlock, but that might be a really hazardous thing to do. Wall presses, they're designed to squash things up and put them in bags so you can send them off all around the world for lots of money. Quite a dangerous machine. As a kid, we used to play in the shed, and my cousin and I got stuck in an old wall press. Everyone's having a good old laugh, but it wasn't mechanical. It was just an old metal wrought iron one. Push everything down with levers and put your pins through. But these modern hydraulic ones, they're not the same thing. They're designed to squash things down. They're not going to stop for you. So don't put your arms in there, don't get in there with it running and things like that. The manufacturers now put a lot of interlocks and things on there. The emergency stop is within reach. It's no good if it's over there. Some of them have a protective bar. As soon as you contact that, the machine won't come down. Your plate won't move and things like that. Look at your power cable. Not just look at it for faults. Am I going to trip over it? Think about where you lay that power cord. You know, you might have someone coming in with an armful of something. He doesn't see it, trips over it. There's your next injury. There's someone else off work. So it's just about looking at everything that you come across and just see if there's a hazard, if there's a risk, and what's the risk. So I know as kids we all climb trees. How many of us would climb a tree now? None of us, because it hurts when you fall out, doesn't it? So it's the same thing. Think about it. It's too risky for me to climb a tree. Well, it might be too risky for me to do that task. But I can work around it. I can look at another way of doing it. Got to have some training. You can't just go and stick a shed hand in there and say, here mate, go and make me a couple of bales. You've got to show them how the machine works. Comes back to the operator's manual. There might be something in that manual that you need to know. Always make sure people read the instructions properly. And look at your warning signs. You have stickers and labels and things like that. Yes, we're people. We do things how we want to do it. But if there's a sign, it's a final reminder. Don't do it. Don't put your hand in here. It might entrap you. So keep your labels up. If you've got shearers coming in and your equipment's all decrepit and no labels and things, I'd be surprised if they'd come back. So make sure everything's there on the machine. They're an expensive machine. Keep it in good condition. And look for cracking of things. People think something like that won't crack. They do crack. As they're crushing, they'll stretch. They'll move in and out like that. You can't always see it. If you did, you'd be shocked. You thought you bought a shoddy machine. But steel and things like that, that does move. It does stretch. It is elastic. Eventually, it will crack. So machinery requires certain competencies to make sure it's safe. I'm sure you're probably all very good at breeding and growing and what other tasks you do in the agricultural industry. And we look at the design and the manufacturer. We went and looked at some agricultural equipment and found some faults with it. Ended up with the due diligence of one of the inspectors having the ladder on the side of this grain silo moved. So where the ladder was, he had to jump almost to the working platform, especially someone short like me. Now the manufacturer's designed it, he's moved the ladder closer to where it can be. Also on top of that particular equipment is a rotating shaft. You have to lean over this shaft to operate a lever. Well, that's rotating. So yes, he's put a guard on it. Well, the guard wasn't sufficient. It was too short. There's little nuts and bolts at the end. They can grab clothing and that. So the manufacturer's changed his design there. Correct use, you wouldn't put a beginner like me in a header. you'd give me some training. You'd sort of sit me down, you'd give me some training, the manual, and you'd then verify my competency. You wouldn't say, I've shown you everything, off you go. You'd sit down with me, let me operate it and show you that I've actually learnt from you how to use the machine. Repairs and alterations. You're out 50 k's from town or 50 miles from town, something breaks. Who's going to fix it? You are. So, but are you a good farmer or are you a good welder? Or are you a good machinist? So you've got to have some multi-skilling to be a farmer. That's understandable. Some of these repairs might just be a little bit beyond you. You might go to weld up your power takeoff shaft, but the consumable, the welding rod you've used might not be of the right grade of steel. It might be like fencing wire and very soft. But if it's the right grade of steel, then the metals will join properly and it'll be a good firm fix. So you need to know a little bit about welding and stuff like that. The correct tools, we all know about the shifting spanner or a crescent, whatever you want to call it. They're terrible. They're round nuts off and things like that. Try and find the right tool for the job, the right spanner, the right block and tackle. If you're lifting 1 tonne, don't use a half tonne. Use the right tool every time for it. And it's hard to do maintenance in the field, particularly hydraulic maintenance, because hydraulic systems are so prone to the smallest amount of dust. They fail, they sag, they'll do strange things. We put out some safety alerts early on this year regarding some boom type EWPs that were sagging. And because they're changing the hydraulic components in the field, they get dust and then they fail. So if you're going to do any work like that on hydraulics and stuff, do it somewhere clean and neat, out of the wind. If you've got your components in plastic bags, don't take them out of that until you're ready to use it. All right, hydraulic fluid gets contaminated very, very easy. And these things work on really high pressure. You don't want them failing, especially if you're underneath it and you haven't blocked it up. So, and then isolate it. So isolation's a good thing. If there's no energy, no potential, then there's very little chance of getting hurt. Okay, so come back to what I said before, turn it off, turn it off, turn it off every time. Look at your hydraulic pump. A lot of hydraulic systems have a pressure gauge. So you've turned it off, but it's still showing something on the gauge. Has it got pressure or not? You're not sure. First thing you do is tap on the glass. That's very destructive to those gauges. If you need to tap on it, just tap it on the side, on the metal body, and sometimes the needle will go back. But that's also another warning. Why is my needle not accurate? Why is it showing pressure when I don't think I've got any? So therefore you need to go back and look at that hydraulic system and find out where the fault is, because it might go to 0 but it's still got 500 psi or something like that in it. These are great. I had a farm, he has the children come up on the weekends, want to ride the motorbikes. How does he stop them? Doesn't want to be the cruel uncle. Put a tag on it. Put a tag, it stops him. Oh, some bloke from WorkSafe said, oh no, you can't use that, so I had to put a tag on it. They're a really good thing for that, but that's just another use of it. The idea of that is you're telling someone that there's something wrong with this machine. It's most important if you see a hazard that you report it or tell someone. Farmhand might come up and go, oh, the bloody motorbikes, you know, I'm getting electric shocks from the spark plug or something stupid like that. Well then, okay, tag it out. Teach them how to tag things out. You can't just come along and remove it yourself. It's preferred the person that put the tag on knows that the tag's removed. He doesn't always have to remove it himself, because the maintenance system or your servicing system, it might go off somewhere else while he stays on the farm. So he might not, but it has to be someone with some sort of authority. If I walked into a farm shed and saw something tagged out and the farmer said, oh, that's been fixed, and took it off, I would be questioning him. What have you done? How did you know that was safe? What have you done to make sure it's safe? Does the tag need to stay on there? All right, so this is a small way of reporting your hazards to someone else. They see the tag on it, they'll either not use it or they'll question it. Oh, sorry. There you go. If you have any questions, now's a good time to give them to me, or I'll meet you during the networking.
I can't see any questions that have come through, so I'll let you go, Geoff.
Thank you.
As I said, and as Geoff just said, then there'll be opportunities during networking, morning tea and lunchtime. And I would hazard that if it's out there, Geoff's probably seen it. So he is an absolute wealth of information. Thank you very much, Geoff.